Well, I see that it is 8:01. So I think at this point, everybody pretty much knows who Clark is. Clark, why don't you take it away?
Awesome. So I think I should share my screen. You guys can all hear me okay, correct?
We can hear you okay, and I just turned on allowing you to share your screen. So
it turned green. I'm going to be risky and share my desktop.
Ooh.
Share. And then we will go to pages. Okay. I think this looks good. And the font here is big enough and you can read what I have, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. So this is a talk on learning styles. This is the 6th talk I've given in Don's series here. And I'm glad you guys keep putting up with me because I like doing talks. But I'm going to run out someday of knowledge that I need to communicate. So learning styles is an interesting one for me because normally you would go to Color Lab and Mike Jacobs would give the learning styles talk. Unfortunately, Mike Jacobs is no longer with us, but while he was, I used to attend those and be kind of interested. It was an area I didn't know a lot about. And I thought, there's stuff to learn here. And at some point in the 2000s, I decided to write up a web page on learning styles. And I made a great start and I went down and did a lot and did research and I bought lots of books and everything. And I kind of ran out of gas. And I revisited that page and that's what got me interested in giving this talk. But I don't think I've ever given the talk before. So why do we care? Well, as you know, being a square dance caller involves a wide range of skills. And one of the skills we need to have is the ability to teach dancers. It's a rare caller who isn't teaching some dancers throughout the year, who just travels and calls. So we need to teach dancers. And usually that means teaching beginner dancers, although maybe there's, dancer callers who only teach A2 or C1 or whatever, but still there's teaching. So we care because we do teaching, and knowing about learning styles is a piece of teaching. So as I say, it's part of a larger subject. How do we teach square dancing? Well, first I want to say we're all different. We all learn different ways. We all absorb knowledge. We all have different interests. We all have different abilities, etc. And we all have a different preferred way of learning. But people, educators, have kind of divided those into different categories. And the most common ones you hear talked about are these 3: visual learners, auditory learners, and kinesthetic learners, VAK, the VAK model. And the visual learners in theory learn by seeing, the auditory learners learn by hearing, and the kinesthetic learners learn by doing. Maybe the auditory learners also learn by reading and writing. What are you? Do people kind of have a sense of how they best learn stuff? I can see some of you people. I can't see you all nodding or whatever. Oh, I'm going to do something scary here. Stop sharing. For those of you who have your picture up, how many of you think you learn best by visually learning stuff? Raise your hand. I have, look, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. How many learn best by hearing it, reading it, writing it down? No. Oh, there's one. Maybe Steve. Yeah. And how many learn kinesthetically, kind of by doing and manipulating? Whoa, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. 5, 6. Interesting.
I'm a combination of all of them.
Yeah.
How many people think they
Depends on
have
the
2 or more
situation.
learning styles so that they kind of like some things work and other things work? Yeah.
Multisensory.
Say again?
Multisensory.
Multisensory. Okay, awesome. So let me go back to my screen. This is not the same as Teams, so you have to learn new things. Okay, so as people said, you may discover that you have a primary learning style and perhaps a secondary one. But maybe that third, if you're visual and auditory, maybe the kinesthetic makes no sense to you. Or if you're kinesthetic primarily and visual second, like the auditory just doesn't work. So I'm going to go into a little more detail. I got this from a talk that Dottie Welch, a square dance caller in Nova Scotia, did. And visual learners, she said 65% of the population. They primarily gather information by sight. They tend to say and use words like, I see what you're doing. Even I see what you're saying. I see what to do. They take detailed notes. They learn well from diagrams, pictures, and written information. Maybe they're people who know how to read a map. And they like to read for themselves rather than be read to. Then for auditory learners, she wrote 30% of the population. They primarily gather information by hearing. One thing I'll stop and note right now, square dance teaching is pretty interesting. We're not like in a real classroom. Like we're up on the stage and primarily we talk to the dancers. Maybe primarily we are oriented toward teaching auditory learners. They tend to say, I hear how to do it. I hear what you're saying. Listen first, and then they'll take notes afterwards, or maybe not at all, or they'll just rely on the notes the teacher hands out. They learn well from the spoken word. And she says they tend to look up or down or close their eyes when trying to absorb information because they want to shut out all that visual environment so they can concentrate on what they're hearing. And finally, the kinesthetic or tactile learners are 5% of the population, even though we had a lot of us in this talk today raise our hands for that. Primarily gather information through touch and movement. Well, that sounds good for square dancing, huh? They tend to say, I feel how this works. They tend to watch the teacher very closely. I know my older daughter was very good in ballet at watching and imitating exactly all the stuff she's supposed to be doing in ballet. So in that sense, I think she learned ballet, some of ballet kinesthetically. And you need a self-determined learning environment where you can, hold on to the chemical molecules and manipulate them, or you can watch or participate in the environment. Learning skills by imitation and practice. Maybe a lot of music, playing the violin, etc., is learned kinesthetically. Needs physical information, wants to know what it feels like. And we know that when you first teach a lady's chain or right and left through, the lady's chain with the courtesy turn and all the hand motion, and this hand goes there and that goes here, and the guy backs up and the girl walks forward on the courtesy turn. That involves a lot of kinesthetic learning, even for the people who aren't kinesthetic learners. It feels very weird and awkward the first time you do it. And maybe learning right and left through from a squared set versus lines facing versus 8 chain may all feel very different to the kinesthetic learner, and they may need to be moved through those different environments, those different formations. So first off, are we happy with where we are and people believing all this? Sound good? Yes, raise a hand. Good, awesome. Okay, well, not only are you a learner, you are the teacher. And believe it or not, people say you tend to teach using your primary learning style. If you're a kinesthetic learner, you're going to teach people kinesthetically because that's what you know and what makes sense to you, et cetera, the best. And oops, that leaves some of your learners at a loss. So when you're teaching your primary learning style, and that happens to be the one that doesn't make sense to a third of your class, that's kind of a problem. So here's an idea. We should all, as teachers, be able to teach each of our calls in ways that appeal to all the 3 different learning styles. So I tried to come up with some examples, and I'll give you some. You guys might have some. And I think it's always great to learn from different people what things work for certain calls, et cetera, and what's worked for you. But I know my wife is not receptive to auditory input. Not just she doesn't listen to me, that's just not a preferred way for her to learn stuff. She's happy to read it, but if I read out loud to her, if I find a newspaper article and I say, let me read this to you, there's kind of a big sigh and she'll go, okay. And I know not to just do it. I have to kind of ask her permission because it's a load on her. It's not her preferred method. Just give it to me and let me read it. But sometimes when we're reading articles or listening to something in the car on the radio, we like to be able to pause it and talk about the point the author just raised. Do we agree? Do we disagree? Does it remind us of anything else, et cetera? So it's not uncommon for me to do it, but I know it's not her preferred method of receiving input. Learning line dancing. Some people learn line dancing. You just stand behind someone who's doing it and imitate what they're doing. I assume they're good at kinesthetically learning stuff. I can't do that. That doesn't work well for me. Learning cloverleaf, sometimes you give them the mental model, the visual picture of 2 major roads crossing and all the entrance and exit ramps forming a cloverleaf. And that clicks with some people. Al Stevens was telling the story of one guy, a dancer that just wasn't getting it, who was an airline pilot. And at some point he said to him, he did a, side star through, double pass through. He goes, John, your heading is 360. You want to make a left turn to 90. And the guy goes, Roger. And he just kind of goes with a 270 degree loop. Like those terms clicked with him. Walk and dodge. I asked people, give me an example of how to teach walk and dodge kinesthetically. Because again, kinesthetically didn't really make sense to me. Maybe that's my 3rd one that doesn't really work for me. And they go, well, it's kind of like putting groceries in a minivan. You slide the door open and you shove the groceries in. Maybe that helps somebody. It doesn't help me, but you can see it has the slidey part, the dodgy part, and it has the going forward part, the walkie part. So maybe that's a kinesthetic way to teach walk and dodge. I don't know. Circulate. People speak of the racetracks. You have an inner racetrack and an outer racetrack. And maybe that gets a sense of the pattern of it. I had a dancer I was teaching relay the deucey to in my basement. My basement is 3 squares and a little bit long, left to right as I face it as the caller, and only 1 square in the other direction. And as a caller, I can stand somewhere else and see the dancers. And I had relay the deucey done, and I was kind of repeating it. And it ends up that the long wave formed where you go 6-4-6 happened to match the long way of the basement. And she was in it and she was doing okay. And I'd move her to a new part and kind of okay. And at some point she's like, can I get outside and watch? And I'm like, sure. So we substituted someone in and she watched it. And I put it back in and she danced it and she was doing pretty good. And then accidentally, unbeknownst to me, not intentionally, I moved them around and then, you know, I bend the line and pass the ocean later. And suddenly the long way was going the other way in the basement. And I called a relay the doocy and it started and she's like, whoa, she balked. And that was a completely different call to her when it worked in the other direction in the basement. And I'm sure we can come up with some more examples. I have a little bit of discussion, just ideas I thought of in the shower. I said the first one already. Normally we teach by talking over the mic. That's kind of, when you're teaching squares of dancers, that's like maybe your only way of teaching. Sometimes we can give little visual demos, and I want to say more about that because I think those are worth something, and I think they appeal to other types of learners. I know callers who have berated dancers over the mic, either individually or the whole group, like, how stupid are you? Can't you figure this out? Clearly, that's a bad thing. That's a don't do that. I know callers who have gotten out on the floor and grabbed some guy who just can't get it by the shoulders and steered him around. I'm pretty sure that's an ineffective teaching method. And then the third thing I wanted to mention is, if you really want to know how your teaching's doing and what people are learning, just listen to someone who maybe wasn't there last week ask some of their friends who were, hey, I missed last week. Can you tell me how that walk and dodge works? And just overhearing dancers trying to teach other dancers or explain to them how it works or their knowledge of it when they haven't really thought about how to teach or anything is frightening. Well, you kind of stick out your left hand and walk forward and someone will grab you and then you spin around a bit. And they're talking about, you know, fan the top or pass the ocean or something. It's just incredible. So we are going to be surprised by what people really learn and what they really internalize instead of what we teach. I had another note from when I'd prepared for when I'd done the web page, and I'll give you a pointer to the web page at the end. It has a lot more ideas and examples, and we had a whole discussion on a mailing list one time on learning styles and teaching to learning styles. It's real important in teaching to have a good learning environment. You want an environment where the dancers feel safe, they're safe to make mistakes, they're able to absorb information in whatever the best way they can do it. One dancer spoke of, they had a pretty good learning environment going on. The caller was teaching, everyone's following, they're all with it. And then he put on the music and she could instantly feel the dancers in her square tense up and start to tune out. The music wasn't the right music. It wasn't conducive to learning. Maybe the beat was wrong. Maybe it was too busy. Maybe it was too noisy or whatever. And it just was instantly obvious to her that as soon as they put on the music, like that was a bad thing. So I thought that was interesting. So we should think about the learning environment. Okay. I want to turn off my sharing for a minute and just get a sense. Is everybody happy with me believing all this? Yes. Good. Yep. We're with it. Okay. Here is, I think, where the talk goes off the rails. This is the big but. There's no evidence that teaching to learning styles causes learning or better learning. Everything I've said is wrong and has been debunked. Learning styles is a huge myth in education that developed in the 1960s and was debunked by 2008. And yet it still persists today. Even to the point of me offering to give this talk and everyone like, sure, learning styles, that's a good thing. We ought to learn about that. But this is good news. because we no longer have to try and come up with the 3 different ways to teach each call to match the learning styles of all the people out there. We no longer need to know our learning style. We don't have to worry that we're only teaching 1/3 of the people. We can and should be spending all that time I've just given you back on what is good teaching. What is good evidence-based teaching? What does work, not what do we think works or sounds good, which is what learning styles are. And those would be called evidence-based teaching techniques. And frankly, in the square dance world, it would be knowing which callers are known to be good teachers and finding out what they do and why. So I looked up on the web as I was preparing this talk, and frankly, that whole web page I'd made on teachings, on learning styles, they really never clicked with me, and I couldn't come up with good examples. And when I'd ask even the callers who were supposed to be good at it, they couldn't come up with anything better than loading groceries into a minivan for walk and dodge, which I didn't think was super effective. I did some research. That's kind of why I ran out of gas while I was making my learning styles page, is at some level, I didn't believe in it and it didn't click with me. Not just one style, but any of the whole thing it was saying and what the proponents claimed. So based on this website, I Googled evidence-based teaching techniques, and they had a top 10 evidence-based teaching techniques. So I'm going to go over those. And it ends up that these don't all apply to our teaching environment. We're teaching adults from a microphone, a dance environment, and they're supposed to be having fun doing it, there to sit in a class and learn. And most of these you're going to see are more oriented toward kids in a classroom. So I didn't list all of them because all of them didn't apply, but the ones that seemed to apply or we could get some nugget out of, I did. So here we go. Number 1, clear lesson goals. I think that applies to us. It's crucial that we are clear about what we're trying to teach during each lesson. We should have order that we're teaching the stuff, how we're going to teach each call, and for each call, like I'm going to set them up this way and go over there, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to review it over here, and then I'm going to do that. I'm going to teach this call with a demo. I'm going to teach this call from the mic, et cetera, et cetera. So clear lesson goals and what you're trying to do as you teach each call, et cetera. You got to know that. Can't argue with that. That applies to us. Show and tell. We do show and tell in square dancing where we get a demo group, but often I see people say, okay, I'm going to show you how this call works. We're going to get 4 experienced dancers and we're going to do a ladies chain. Here we go. Okay, you guys ladies chain over, ladies chain back, and you describe a few things. But frankly, I think that if you just ask dancers to watch that without some more instruction and ideas on how to watch a demo, then what they see is a carousel or a merry-go-round or a tilt-a-whirl at the amusement park that looks very complicated, and they just come away going, wow, that's complicated. That's going to be hard to learn. Whereas instead, if you say, focus on, guys, focus on this male dancer here, and I'm going to describe what he's doing and all that because you're going to be doing this soon. Ladies, focus on this dancer here, and I'm going to describe to you what they're doing. You've got to tell people how to watch a demo other than just seeing the gestalt whole confusing mess of here's relay the deucey. Here we go, boom, isn't this going to be an exciting call to learn? So we've got to use demos well. Also, we have a new thing that we didn't have 10 or 20 years ago, terminations. And for people who like to take in their input by watching things and want the global view of it, the from the ceiling view. Terminations is great. Not only can you stop it, you can go back, you can go at a different speed, and it's got the written definition next to the action that's happening. So it kind of combines like both those ways of taking in information. And when I say that learning styles are bunk, it doesn't mean that each person has that there aren't learning styles. There are different preferences for how you take in your information, how you record your information, how you process your information. I'm just saying that if we take a group of people who say they have a certain learning style and we break them into two, and we teach them with their preferred learning style and we teach them with other learning styles and then test them afterwards, they both score the same. They didn't learn better, faster when the learning style matched the way they like to take in information. Oh, Don Beck. It says, make sure that all dancers do the new call correctly the first time. That's one of the things in Don's talk on how to teach. And it's really important. If they learn it, if you're teaching, I don't know, past the ocean, and some dancers do it wrong the first time because they misunderstood your words or something. When they get in a clutch situation later at dance speed, they're likely to go and fall back on that first bad idea, that first wrong idea that they had. So Don endeavors to make sure that his teaching is such that they're going to do it right the very first time. So evidence-based teaching, show and tell. And there's on the website, their website, they have a description more related to classrooms and all that. But I think that we do make good use of show and tell, or we can. Strategy 3, questioning to check for understanding. While you're teaching, how do you know that your students are learning what you're teaching? Maybe you give them a little quiz in the middle or something. Well, we don't really have our dancers take quizzes or tests. However, every time we put the music on and have them dance, we're basically giving them real-time quizzes. And are we observing the results of the quizzes? Are we watching the dancers dance, watching the pauses, the struggles, and the breakdowns, and then altering our teaching based on these results? And I don't really have a great answer to that question because I don't think that this strategy really applies to us very much, except for the fact that when we put on the music and they dance, we're always quizzing them on how well are they responding to what they've learned from us. So we should keep that in mind, and maybe, obviously if we see them struggling, we might want to stop and reteach it or something. And Don, another thing I learned from Don is when they come in next week and you taught them right and left through last week, don't just get them up and warm them up and quiz them by having them do right and left through cold without doing anything. Instead, he recommends reteaching each of the calls from the previous week. You can quiz them on the calls from 2 weeks ago cold, but don't quiz them on the calls from last week cold. There's lots of advantage to this with the reteach. If they didn't get it the first time, it helps the people who missed last week, and et cetera. And it also probably prevents some of them from doing it wrong the second time when they come back when they're in a new week. So, okay. Strategy 4 didn't apply to us. Here's strategy 5. Plenty of practice. Well, we definitely do that in square dancing, but this big paragraph here kind of says they should be practicing what they learned during your show and tell, and that should reflect what was in your lesson goal. I know callers who teach something and then move on, and the dancers never get to practice it. And we as callers get bored with practicing and calling the same thing and moving around the square and doing it again and again. But the dancers, especially if they've just seen the call, aren't really bored with it. And the practice, there's evidence on how you should reinforce it, do it a lot here and then fade it a little bit and do other things and then come back and then hit him again here, hit him again the next tip and hit him again and so forth. So there is evidence on when you should reinforce, etc. Number 6, provide your students with feedback. So this was interesting to me. Giving feedback involves letting your students know how they've performed on a particular task, along with ways they can improve. But it's not the same as praise. Praise just tells the student like how good they are. Feedback gives your student tangible understanding of what they did well, where they're at, and how they can improve. I don't know if we can do this in square dancing, especially to a big group. I mean, certainly you want to go, hey, you guys are doing great and blah, blah, blah. At some level, as they're dancing, they're getting feedback of how well they're doing and are they having fun. But we might want to talk about this one later. Number 7, be flexible about how long it takes to learn. And look, we even have the word dancing right here in the paragraph. Given enough time, every student can learn. Like, that's not revolutionary. It underpins the way we teach martial arts, meaning you don't grant the next colored belt until they've mastered it. Different students progress through the belts at different rates. Mastery learning. But within the constraints of a crowded curriculum, meaning a crowded dance floor, and we've got to teach them mainstream in a certain amount of time, can we really do this? We have to graduate them. But you and I know as teachers, different people learn at different rates, and it'd be great if we could be flexible on how long it takes to learn. So that was the strategies 8, 9, and 10 didn't seem to apply to us. And I wanted to kind of hit a bit of a summary here. We want good teaching. We hopefully at least gave you a hint that learning styles is a myth and has been debunked. We don't want to have to worry about that. But we do want good teaching. We do know that every person is different and every person, certain things click with them and don't click with them. We may have to have more than one way of teaching and explaining certain calls for people who didn't get it our first way. And I have a reference to my learning style talk. But I've been updating that talk in preparing for this, and I haven't uploaded the latest version, so don't go to this quite yet. And at that point, I'm going to come to an end and stop sharing. And I'm going to say that my prepared talk is done. It took 35 minutes, and we can have some discussion. Maybe I raised some controversial points. Maybe people learned something.
So I'll start with I am aware of quite a bit of the research suggesting that learning styles are bunk. And yet when I'm teaching square dancing, boy, it sure seems like whether they're bringing their own background to it, different people certainly learn different ways, and you can toss them into roughly those 3 categories. Give me a swing dancer on the floor, and I don't have to tell them anything. I just have to run them through a sequence once, and they've got it cold. Give me a line dancer, and I'll teach them verbally, teach them by definitions. So yeah, that maybe the learning styles are bunk, but there are certainly a lot of things that are similar to that people bring by way of their former experience, at least in my experience.
Okay.
So who else is out there? Don, you're muted or something.
I thought I unmuted myself. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
So Clark, I was just curious if you would go through my talk on teaching, as it sounds like you have and picked out some of the good points, but if you would go through that and go through a session we did 2 or 3 or 4 weeks after that, where Barry Johnson spoke about how the brain worked, which sort of explained why some of the things that I talked about worked. And I'd be curious on some feedback from you at some point as to how those two things correlate with your current research on how to teach, how to learn, how to understand. I'll send you well.
Yeah, send me
If you
pointers
need
to
a
it. That
URL
sounds
for
good.
Barry's.
Right.
Actually, I think I sent you the spreadsheet on previous sessions. That probably has it. But once I have electricity back and a real computer, maybe I'll be able to do that for you.
Yeah.
But I'd love feedback.
Right. I guess one of the comments is how well are we doing teaching? And my bet is we're doing reasonably well. I guess there certainly are some callers and some teaching sessions that have been horror shows, you know, the manhandling, the berating the dancers and all that. And it isn't just them teaching any one call. I bet it's their whole attitude and how they, you know, how they approach it. But I would like to think that there's enough people who think about teaching and enjoy teaching that they're good at it and their lessons are pretty good, and intuitively or through talks and sessions like these, you know, have picked up other hints and other ideas, and make little tweaks and improvements throughout the whole thing. So my bet is things are, you know, what you do and all that lines up. There's another thing that I reference in my website. I'm going to put on the screen briefly. I reread this. I hadn't seen it in a while, and it really resonated with me. I almost felt like it could be another talk, and that would be, let's see if we can pull this up. We have to go to here, and at the bottom, additional reading. What makes square dancing hard? Oh, and I just need to go over here. Wrong here. There we go. This guy. So this is from Sobalski, and it's dated 1982. So this is a long time ago. And I kind of remember him doing this, and he wrote it up, and he talks about what the brain can do cognitively, not from a teaching perspective, but from an execution perspective, as you call to dancers. And it goes on and on, the limits to human performance. There's short-term memory limits. There's how chunking works. There's decision-making. You can make 5 decisions a second. And then there's the fact that your brain is generally lazy, and then critics and patching. And based on all this stuff, he can give these examples where people make mistakes because they get overloaded. And when they're overloaded, good dancers can shed the load by doing a bunch of these things. And he says, now we can measure how difficult things are, and has some good conclusions. And this is a great article with a few references. And it's not exactly teaching, but it talks about what makes dancing easy or difficult. So again, in the website, go look that article up and read that. And I think you'll find that interesting.
Clark, I vaguely recall that article and stuff that Jacobs did that was really interesting and insightful, but I couldn't remember at the time how I could practically use that information to teach better.
Yeah. I asked Mike for a bunch of book references when I wanted to learn it, and he gave me 3 or 4, and that dragged me into, building a library of like 10 books. And I later, one of our good dancers was known for being an excellent teacher in high school. And when I was chatting with him about the subject, one of the books I'd gotten was one of his favorite books. He's like, oh, this one's awesome. And I'm saying, I was like, but that's the book that doesn't click with me the least of all the books in my library on learning. He goes, no, this is awesome. And yeah, somehow all this teaching and learning and stuff doesn't always map over to how we have to do square dance instruction. I agree with you.
I
Daryl.
have a comment
Whoops.
to make. Sorry, this is Cece.
Go, Cece, and then we'll get Daryl next.
So this isn't referring to dancing, but I am a veteran homeschooling mom.
Yep.
And my firstborn, she was 7, and we had gone through 10 different reading programs that did not work. Blood, sweat, and tears on both of our parts. It led me to a lot of research on how to teach. And to get through to her to where she could conquer reading, she actually had to do kinesthetic. So 10 reading programs, right? We tried all these different things. And what worked for her was actually, it was a program where you actually spell so first you learn your basic alphabet and the sounds of the basic alphabet, and you write those and in cursive, okay? And she had, so I had to teach her how to spell, and then she could read. So she actually wrote her own spelling book, and she wasn't required to read until after she had learned 120 words. And then she only read those words to start with. And now she's in college in a doctorate program to become a pharmacist. Okay, so she went from, long story short, she's dyslexic, but being able to use the kinesthetic learning allowed a bridge to the other types of learning. Without the kinesthetic, it was obvious she was very smart. She had lots of common sense and all of that. And then also the same thing with my autistic son. My second-born is autistic. So I have all these learning disabled kids that I've taught at home. And like using all avenues to the brain for learning simultaneously is the most effective way of learning. So seeing it, writing it, the kinesthetic, saying it, and doing it all within moments of each other is the fastest way to learn, because it engages all parts of the brain.
I like that. Daryl?
Yes. I was told once, never ask a question that you don't have the answer to yourself, right? One thing that was mentioned in your presentation, good presentation, by the way, Clark.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it. A goal, know what your goal is. Now,
Yes.
I would suggest that the goal would be different for teaching brand new beginner dancers as opposed to teaching, say, plus from mainstream. What are the differences and why, and how would you approach it? The differences.
Well, just off the top of my head, if I'm teaching brand new dancers, and even for that, you have some, why are they there? Why are they motivated to come and even want to learn to do this activity that you're talking about? Clearly, if I go into a school and I'm facing a gymnasium full of 12 squares of 7th graders who are skeptical, what I'm going to do and say and how I'm going to teach or survive that experience is going to be different than the 1 square that is in my basement because their goal is to go join tech squares and learn real quick because they want to go dance with their friends. But teaching brand new people, it seems like you want to meter it out so that they're kind of always, they're mostly moving, dancing, having fun, and you're just adding a little bit to it and a little bit to it. And you're kind of not making it seem like real learning, like it's not arduous in some way. As opposed to if I had some plus dancers and they said, we want to learn advanced. At that point, I might take more of a tact of saying advanced is different attitude, different ideas than plus. It's still using all the calls, but we're going to have to firm up some of the plus you've learned and broaden it, or maybe change your thinking a little bit. And we might be able to, like initially you just get up and call plus, typically I do, and I suddenly discover, almost like a dentist picking at your teeth, like, we have a little problem over here, we have a little problem over there. And my initial goal is to come up with a list of things that they don't know and do very well, that somehow their previous teaching, learning, dancing experience didn't work well for them moving on to advanced. And let's beef that up simultaneously with teaching them 1 or 2 advanced calls so they feel like they're learning advanced. But in reality, I need to give them a better foundation for their current dancing before I can build advanced on it. Does that do anything for an answer, Daryl?
It does. It does, definitely. Understanding that I would imagine practically everybody that's here on this right now teaches beginners. And to me, the first thing that we're teaching beginners is a language. And we have to get them to a certain point of rote learning before they really feel the traffic. And traffic is what we're actually teaching them. The movement, do this, do that, go from here, go to there. That's what it's all about. And repetition. But I would suggest that anybody that's been teaching classes for any length of time, you recognize a point in the classes where they are actually dancers. They're dancing to the calls rather than having to do thinking about the things that they've already been taught. And that's when they're dancers. That used to be the beginner level. And that would be the first goal. After that, it's a matter of adding to their nomenclature. How many different ways can we go through this same traffic pattern with different names to remember for these actions and everything? But I would say probably the first goal should be just getting them to learn the language so we can explain everything that's going to come later. And knowing that there aren't very many places you can go in a square. You've only got 4 couples and 4 sides to it. Once they're comfortable with that, you can teach them as far as you want. And the big difference between the beginner dancer and the ones that you're going to teach your advanced to is they have already learned that language. But yeah, thank you,
Right.
Clark.
So I want to say that the goal on the evidence-based teaching thing, which said, right off the bat, have a goal. I was treating that in the microcosm of the square dance lesson and the call we're about to teach. And you've gone up to a higher level of what are your overarching goals, and in what order are you going to accomplish them, and how do you accomplish them? And the first one is being able to get people to respond to your voice, learn a vocabulary, and move with a muscle memory response so they are dancing. And then beyond that, we can move on. Right.
The long-term goal for most of us, I would suspect, is to prepare them to dance within the community, which would be typically either mainstream or plus. And for some areas of the world, basic would be that first goal. But yeah, I would think the long-term goal for most would be that, which might put some limitations on the definitions or the dancing applications, which standard still would apply there, I would think. But yeah, those are the things that I would think of as far as the goal of teaching anyway. With that, I'll shut up. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I totally agree with Cece about the multisensory learning. So because I'm a multisensory learner myself, I ended up teaching that way when I was in the school district. So so I hope to call that way as well. And when I'm presented in the right kind of learning environment, I pick it up rather quickly. But if the style isn't the right fit for me, then I will struggle with it until I find a way around it. One of the ways I learn is actually by moving. So if you ever watch any of the videos, you'll see me turn off the video so that I can actually do some highlighting or something like that, because I can concentrate better instead of just sitting still quietly. That's one of the ways and I don't think that's really discussed, how much body movement is required for learning as well. It's different than kinesthetic learning where you're touching all the time. It's the actual movement in space.
Related to that, one of the things that my wife and I did when we were learning dancing was we took taminations and mounted a projector in the ceiling of our living room so we could see it down on the floor, because looking at it on the screen wasn't working at all, but being able to follow it in patterns on the floor totally helped.
Okay, good idea.
One of the things that happened to me initially is we were driving to dances. Mike Tursoff, one of our dancers who had learned all this a couple years before me, would want to tell me about some square dance call. Maybe I'm learning advanced or C1, and he's like, "Oh yeah, well, there's this great call. It goes like this." And he said, and he's going to describe it. Of course, we're driving, and I'm in the back seat. So he's like, "Well, pretend you're, man number one. Okay, you do a square through 4. Where are you?" I'm like, "Okay, I see. I'm facing my corner over here. Okay, now step to a wave. Now the way this call works is you do this," and he'd start describing it. You scoot back, and then you kind of go in the left hand, and you hinge in the middle and now where are you? And I'm like, I'm lost. And he says, "Well, okay." And it took me a long time to be able to visualize and follow his descriptions of new calls I've never done in my head. But once I got my brain around that, I started getting pretty good at that and did that a lot. So there definitely are things that you aren't good at initially that you can get better at. if you ask someone to, I play a lot of board games. Let's say I have all you over and we want to do a board game. Do you want me to hand you the rules and you read them? Do you want me to teach you the rules, just tell you verbally and maybe move a couple of things around on the board because you kind of have the board there and see you've got a scoreboard in front of you and you got these dice and you've got 3 player pieces? Or do you want to just kind of get started and skip the rules and you'll learn as we go? And I think that almost nobody, except for board gamers, and maybe, challenge dancers, wants you to hand them the rule set and learn the rules of the game by reading them. They're the pedantic people who need to know every single rule, all the corner cases, and they learn better by just picking it up and doing it themselves. And they don't really trust that you're going to teach them well and you're going to remember everything. The average adult I've worked with, I can do a quick explanation. I've warned them, this is going to take me about 5 minutes to explain it to you. It's not too complicated a game. And most people who experience a new game are used to having some other adult tell them how it works, although often it's not a great explanation. And they leave a few things out. And there's always a couple of, oh, I forgot to tell you while you're playing that when this happens, that happens. And occasionally I hit people who just can't take any learning at all. They're just like, no, let's just start playing it. I'll learn as we go. And I think the same is true with square dance calls. Very few people want to be handed the definitions. And yet when Caller Lab first came out with its definitions, there were a few callers who were advocating with these new definitions. When it's time to teach, you stand up at the mic and you read them verbatim to the dancers. And that might have been an example of a caller, teaching with his learning style. I don't know, but I don't think that's necessarily an effective way to teach our square dance calls.
The caller I learned from when dancers didn't get it would repeat the definition, but louder.
Louder. That works with foreign languages too. Yeah. Daryl.
Yeah, anybody who knows me knows I'm a very, very strong proponent of the Sicilian circle for teaching.
Yes.
The reason being 90% of what we have to teach takes 2 couples to teach it. And I do very little teaching of those movements within the square. I like to get them off to 2 couples. At present time, I am teaching a very, very small class. We have 1 square of new people that we're teaching. Even at that, I'll separate them into 2 sets of 2 couples for the teaching. And I'll drill them there. Now, if I'm going to teach a square through 4, 3, 5, 36, I make sure I have a movement that's going to work well with that, which talks about preparing what you're going to teach when. But if you have a partner trade or a California twirl, you can square through as many hands as you want, knowing pulling by the last hand, it's going to leave couples back to back, partner trade, do it again, 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 again. Then move them into the square and walk them through it, walking them through that movement from the different positions. So they are the different places within the square, from your box, from your static square, from lines, wherever they might run into it. And that way they get their drill. And that was part of the process. Drill counts. They have to have a certain, excuse me, have to have a certain amount of rote dancing that goes with everything. The definition, if they have to stop and think about everything, there's no flow. The combinations, the movements, they have to have enough confidence in the movements as they come in order to turn it into dancing and for you to keep your timing on the floor as well. So yeah, that's another thing. I like the Sicilian circle. And I'll use the variation of that even with 5 couples. It's easy with 6 couples, 7 couples, on and on and on. But the concept still works the same with 4 couples. Thank you.
Yep. Don, this is where you say it's 12 o'clock.
No, Dan's supposed to say it. I'm not here, but I am going to say one thing until Dan does the official one. But my battery on the phone is very low. And I was going to say, if I just sort of disappear, that's because the battery, but I might want to disappear before that, just so I have a couple of electrons left to respond to other things going on in life, or see if they've made any progress on our power. I do have a couple of comments about, we're talking about learning styles and teaching styles and all that. Maybe each week when we have one of these sessions, we ought to do 5 or 10 minutes of reviewing the previous session so that we all understand and remember what we've done, although it's not. But it does make me think about, we talk about teaching square dancers, but it makes me think about teaching square dance callers and how we're doing it here and what's our goal each time. And it makes me think of when I do the mental image classes on Zoom, I do repeat and I do get people to do it. And but I'm going to have to think more on getting some of the people through that. Anyway, I am going to turn it over to Dan and then to make the official announcements. And I do want to thank you, Clark. This was very good. And the comments are good. I can't say I enjoy it as much on the phone, or I can't look at. I did figure out how to get from gallery view to individual view. Double click on a speaker in gallery view and it'll bring them up to individual. Swipe to the side and it gets me a gallery view of 4 people. And I can't get my face out of that. Anyway, thanks, Clark. Dan, it's all yours to do the today. And you were thinking you may have to leave. I hope your problem is solved. We'll talk about that later. Go for it, Dan. Thanks.
I'm not sure about the situation with my problem. My wife is still asleep and hopefully is doing much better. But yes, it has been an hour and 2 minutes at this point that we've been recording. If you need to leave, please feel free to, and Dawn is included in this. Otherwise, hang around and we will continue the conversation. I wanted to, there's total digression and we don't have to go there, but I'm interested in Daryl's comment that most of us are teaching to dancers who will dance to other people. And even though I've got still have a fairly vibrant square dancing scene in my community, I'm wondering how true that actually is and whether or not where that's a motivation for new dancers these days, because it doesn't seem to be the case with the new dancers I'm teaching.
Yeah. Up here, we've got a lot of different callers. So yeah, I mean, they're going to, once they graduate, they're going to be dancing to different callers. You have to consider that. And you also have to kind of let them know that when they hear another voice, because they're used to your voice, they're probably going to have a little problem with that at first, but it's just a quick learn on it. One thing I would like to say about the presentation was that, they talk about how they debunked the 3 styles or whatever. I would say, yeah, they debunked the idea that, well, you only use one or you only use one and maybe another one is kind of, I would say, yeah, you probably use all 3 of them at different times, depending on, and different degrees, depending on who you are, but also depending on what you're learning. So since we're all learning square dancing, you're probably going to find out that a lot of people learn more by one or the other, or all 3 of them, but in different ways. One thing I noticed on, you got somebody who's kind of slow at picking it up or having a real problem with it while everybody else is doing fine on a certain call. You might think about what you use to describe the call to them. It's not what they, one thing that was always told, it's not that you got one guy that's slow or whatever. It's that you're not explaining it or you're not showing him in the way that they're used to learning, or that they learn best. And so, don't blame them particularly, just try to come up with a different way of describing it to them. And one thing that came up, one of the callers here always talking about is how she was trying to explain something to somebody, and she was using the terms like a quarter or a half. But when she finally explained something in degrees, like 180 degrees instead of halfway around, or 90 degrees instead of a quarter turn, that stuck in his head. It's just a matter of, certain people have, through life or something, have learned things in different ways. And you've got, so you got the auditory, you got the, and I guess it probably is somebody who is more of an auditory learner, because otherwise when they did it, it didn't, they still didn't catch it until she finally told them it, in a different way, how to do the same thing, but just use different words. So, but yeah, and that kind of goes to, don't berate somebody, because if somebody's not learning, I mean, ultimately it's because you didn't teach them the right way. Even though everybody else learned it, it's not that, it's just that that particular person learns in a slightly different way, or understands things better in a different way than what you used when you explained to everybody else. And so you just have to take that into consideration.
I'm still a new caller, but one of the things that I have learned through hard, painful experiences, don't ever denigrate the dancers, even as if you think you're delivering it as a joke, period.
Right.
And the other thing related to your 90 degrees versus a quarter thing is I try to teach quarter, 90 degrees, and counting walls.
Yeah.
And getting all of those 3 different ways in there.
And if someone didn't understand a quarter, but did understand 90 degrees, it's probably clear that whatever finally got into their brain and internalized isn't any of those things. That was just more kind of a communication issue than a conceptual issue.
So have we reached that pause in the conversation amazingly early?
I go.
All right. See ya. Seems like we have. I'd love for conversation to go on longer. On the other hand, given that I also have to take care of my wife and her back issues today, maybe I should call it a day. Thank you all for joining us. I will post the video as soon as I can. Thank you very, very much for Clark for your presentation.
I will update my link, and you can link to it, but I also I need to upload the new version, and I'll send you a PDF of the talk.
Awesome. That would be fantastic. And yeah, also one of the things that I need to do, just because I've got hard drives filling up here, is figure out a secondary place to save these recordings, and how to kind of make sure that all of the ancillary materials also have a lifespan beyond our own lives, when they're historically, well, hopefully somebody at some point will find them historically interesting. Anyway, that's up to me. Cool. Thank you all for coming. And I think Don said, well, keep on the Newbie Callers Facebook group for announcements, because I don't remember what the on-off schedule is for the next couple of weeks. Catch you all later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.